Hey, church. Welcome to episode 3 of Afterthought podcast. I'm Sam.
I'm Greg.
And we're going to discuss the sermon from Sunday. Now, in this passage, Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 28, Jesus and his disciples are going from Galilee to the towns of Tyre and Sidon. Right. And while they're there, Jesus encounters a woman, or rather the woman encounters Jesus, and she starts following him around, crying out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me," because her daughter is sick and needs healing. And they have this interesting conversation that is kind of unsettling. I know for a lot of people, this conversation can seem like a stumbling block. And you talked a lot about this. So let's dive in to that uncomfortability. Jesus essentially tells her, "Hey, I've come for the children of Israel." And eventually the conversation gets a little more, maybe intense is the right word, where she won't relent. And he goes, "It's not right to give the children's bread to the dogs."
Right.
And then she's like, "Well, even the dogs get the scraps from the table." So talk to me about Jesus calling her a dog.
Yeah. So I said this yesterday, but upon first reading, that was unsettling for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, Jesus, bro, calm down.
There's this is one of a few stories in the Gospels, like Jesus flipping all the tables and braiding the whip and whip, that feels very like left field for
Right,
Jesus.
right.
At least left field for our imagination of who we think Jesus is.
Right. So, I mean, immediately, if you just read it and don't have any context, don't understand what's really going on, you could easily say, well, Jesus has a lot of bigotry. So he is an Israelite, and in that culture, anything outside of the nation of Israel, the Gentiles, which would be you and me,
Yep.
If we're not Jewish by race, we're Gentiles, they're dirty, they're unclean, they're less than. And so I referenced John 4, Samaria, the woman at the well.
Yeah.
The Samaritan woman. That was the classic passage of him going right into the heart of Samaria and having an interaction both with the Samaritan and with the woman, which both were not cool.
Yeah, two
and
strikes.
So, and so here, this is happening again. It's happening just a different region. This is north of Israel, so this would be up in modern-day Lebanon.
Okay.
And and so he's having this encounter with a woman who's also a Gentile. And so when he calls her a dog, immediately, all of my sirens are going off. Like, what could he possibly be talking about? Mm-hmm. But then, commentators did some of the work for me, helped me understand.
Shout out commentators.
Yeah, way to go. That he's actually he's drawing her in, but he's also drawing the disciples in. Because the context that, remember, Matthew, he's writing to a very Jewish audience. And I think he's wanting to draw the contrast that, Jesus was anti-Pharisee. In the very last scene, there's this indictment on the Pharisees. They're blind guides. Now he goes into this Gentile region and he commends this woman for her faith. So first he needs to draw her out. Yeah. He needs to draw her into this conversation and he needs to say what he said. And he wasn't literally calling her a dog, but he was calling her a house pet. The Greek word there is like, this is a little dog, like a little chihuahua.
Yeah. She was probably bothering him like a chihuahua bothers most people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm anti-chihuahua. I'm just going to go on record. Yeah. And so here he's basically saying, hey, why would I give the bread that belongs to children to dogs? Yeah. And so he's just said, I've come for the lost sheep of Israel. So he's really doubling down on that. Mm-hmm. That really, if you look at the narrative in John, he says, my time has not yet come. And so he's actually foreshadowing for the disciples, this is future ministry. And there will be a day, I said yesterday, where Peter, he's 50 miles from Caesarea, where he'll get that vision on the roof in Joppa, the sheet falling from heaven with all the unclean animals. 3 times it happens, rise, kill, and eat. He says, no. God says, hey, I can't because they're unclean. God says, don't call anything that I've called clean, unclean. And then he ends up in the house of Cornelius in Caesarea, and he preaches the gospel. His entire family, entire household gets saved. And so there's this picture there of Peter, all of his bigotry, all of his biases are shifted in that moment. This is a foreshadowing to that, but he just didn't know it.
No. Yeah. And we see, one of the phrases you mentioned in the Gospel of John, my time has not yet come. There's a phrase, and to be honest, I don't remember where it's at in the Gospels, but the people are coming to Jesus and confronting him saying, like, look at all the crowds. You need to like assert your authority. And Jesus goes, my time has not yet come. Your time is always here. And to me, I was like, oh man, that's such a statement of discernment and wisdom, because for us, a lot of us, if we know what God has for us, we just want to jump into it right away rather than going, no, there's actually a time and a sequence of events and an order, a wisdom about how God does things, that if we just jump into everything right away, we're probably going to screw it up.
Well, yeah, and we want what we want.
Yeah.
And we don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And God's timing's not our timing. I mean, that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
But the reality is the disciples, they're following Jesus around. They have no idea. They don't know. And they have these little snapshots. We'll see in chapter 16 that Peter will make a confession. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. It's the first time that we really even get any indication that they have any idea who he is. Peter had a moment, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out on the water, and walked on water. But we see that they also turn around and are like, hey, explain this parable to me. I don't know.
Yeah, they have a lot of other moments too.
They have more moments where they don't get it than these moments that they do.
Yeah.
And so this whole passage is painting this picture of Jesus speaking to the cultural norm, which he did, but then flipping it.
Yeah.
Hey, you are a house pet. I've come for the children of Israel, but you're so persistent that I'm going to move past that. I'm going to commend you for your faith, and I'm going to grant your request. And I mean, just think about the disciples now looking at that thinking, wait a minute, you've just banged on the people that we have looked up to for all this time. You've called them blind guides, and now you've gone into hostile territory, the place that we're not supposed to be, the people we're not supposed to talk to, and you commend her for her faith. So
seems backwards.
Yeah, his own people reject him. The people, and she called him Son of David. Yeah. She basically called him the Messiah, where the Pharisees refuse to acknowledge that he's Messiah. These people are acknowledging him as Messiah. So, I mean, the whole thing is turned upside down.
I think that theme of rejection is really important for this story, because I don't know if Jesus is, when he calls her a dog, I don't know if that's so much as an indictment on her as it is an indictment on Israel. Like we talked about this last week. In my house, I give my kids food every day, obviously, but they don't always eat it.
And you're a better father because of it.
Thanks. But I give my kids food, and sometimes they don't eat it. They reject it. And so what happens when they reject it? I give it to my dog. And so, and the fact that Jesus answered her prayer in and of itself is kind of a tell that he's answering her prayer because the people who should be accepting him are actually rejecting him. So the thing that they should have got is now going to go to the world. I mean, Paul talks a lot about this in Romans 9 through 11, but what we're seeing here is kind of this foreshadowing of what we will eventually see in the book of Acts, that the gospel's for everyone.
Yeah. And so as we kind of move toward, okay, this is all great information. It gives us some insight, but what does it have to do with us? And yesterday I told this story about being at Trillburger and walking in. I mean, first of all, it is a great burger. You're a food aficionado.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of it, and it looks really good.
You would love it. But walking in and really feeling like all the music stops and everybody turns and is staring at me. And it was my own insecurity because literally me, Abby, Yvonne, I mean, we were the only white people in there. And it just felt and it was a full restaurant, and so I'm feeling very ostracized. But we get our food and we sit down, and Dee leans over to Katie and says, yeah, this is what I used to feel like every Sunday morning. And I love that he can say used to, that now he feels like a part of the family.
It's amazing.
But when you're a minority in a majority's house, it can feel really awkward. And so here we are at this predominantly white church in Montgomery County. And this is not just about race. I mean, this is about anybody that you look at and you tend to judge, look down on in some way, whether it be socioeconomic or, I mean, here we are today. We're filming this on MLK Day. where we're celebrating and remembering Martin Luther King and everything that he did for civil rights. It's also Inauguration Day, which we live in this divided nation where, the people that don't vote like you, you tend to judge in some way. We've gotten to this point where we can't disagree and love each other, and so this passage really speaks directly to that.
Yeah.
That you've got the disciples in seemingly hostile territory. Jesus speaks to that and then commends this woman for her faith. That, hey, she's everything that you're against, and I'm commending her.
Yeah.
And you look up to me. So what does that mean you're going to need to do in the future?
Yes.
So now it's setting this whole new scene, and I mean that's the landscape that we live in today. And it's so frustrating. And, I get frustrated that I hear all of these just buzz phrases that go on, whether it be on social media or in person, of dogging the other side, whatever the other side is.
Yeah.
And we know in a very, very red county, this is what tends to happen. And it's really hard because it really, like, my political views really don't matter at that point. It's more about, hey, how can we disagree with each other and still love each other? How can we look at people and not look down on them, not think less than, but that's what Jesus speaks to. And you said something really important right before we started.
Yeah.
And I want you to say it. It's the difference between the disciples and Jesus.
Yeah, so a lot of times we can fall into the trap when we read the Gospels to put ourselves in the place of Jesus as we look at Jesus as an example for how to live.
Which he is.
Which he is.
Yeah.
But I think before he's an example, he's an indictment. And so, we have to put ourselves in the seat of the disciples first and recognize that Jesus is here to correct us and form us into his image so that we can follow his example. Because if we aren't formed into his image before we follow his example, then all we're doing is just moralizing, and we're just pendulum swinging. It's all behavior modification.
So we become the Pharisees.
Exactly.
Like it's real easy to modify behavior, and I can be told, hey, you need to love them, and I may act in a loving way, but my heart, he said it in the passage last week. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. So we could easily go, and it's I talk a lot about the fruit of the Spirit. And I think for a lot of us, it's a checklist. Yeah. I need to be more loving. I need to be more joyful. I need to be more patient. And so we go and try to strive to be those things. And we can look at the world, toward this group of people, I need to be this way. And it's like, well, no, you just need to allow Jesus. It's living from, not for.
You need to submit to the work of the Spirit in your life. He's the one who grows the fruit. It's the fruit of the Spirit,
right?
Not the fruit of you trying.
And I need to feel more of the conviction of the Spirit when I'm not living that way. I mentioned yesterday, just a real easy example for all of us is drive out toward the highway. You get to a major street corner, and there's probably going to be somebody standing on the corner with a sign asking for help. And I told myself yesterday that I am maybe more apt to put my phone up, even though I have Bluetooth, or look the other way, or look and just like, I don't carry cash, and just, I want to very quickly dismiss them. But in my heart, somebody told me one time that sometimes people like that make a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
They can end up making, 60, 80 grand a year standing out on the street corner collecting money. And so I heard that one time, so now that becomes a stereotype. Then I'm like, oh, or they're just going to buy alcohol and drugs with the money that I give them. All of those things may be true, and that is not a good reason for me not to be moved with compassion.
Well, I was thinking about this today while I was grocery shopping and re-listening to your message, and when you were talking about how a lot of times we forego generosity because we assume they're going to use that for, purposes that we didn't intend. And I just was kind of stopped in my tracks, and I was just thinking like, but God, you give out grace freely to me, even though I'm going to abuse it. Like, even though I'm going to sin, you still keep giving me grace. But for some reason, when there's other people that I'm in a position to be generous towards, I am unmerciful, judgmental. I don't give out $1 like you give out grace to me.
Right. Well, and it goes back to the passage last week when the Pharisees were calling their money devoted to God, so they didn't have to give it to their mom and dad. And it's the same thing that we stereotype and we make excuses and convince ourselves that they don't deserve it.
We actually turn our ungenerosity into some twisted wisdom. Like, it would be unwise to do that because they're just going to do this with it. And it's like we've convinced ourselves that we're actually wisdom when we're actually disobedient.
Right. So putting these two passages together back to back, Jesus, he indicts the Pharisees while having compassion and commending the faith of the least likely person. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
The Samaritan's the hero of the story, which is unsettling to all the Israelites and religious leaders that were listening in that moment.
Yeah, because during the parable, Jesus is like, and the priest is riding by, and all the Jews are probably like, oh, here's the hero of the story. He's going to come in. And then it's like, and he doesn't do anything. And then it's like all the people you think are supposed to be the heroes are not. And the one person you think is like, watch out for that guy, ends up being the example of the story.
Right. So, taken into the modern world that you can look and just imagine today that Jesus was telling a parable, and what if Trump was the hero of the story and you're a Democrat?
Yeah.
Or what if the Democrat were the hero of the story and you're a staunch MAGA Republican? We can't look past our own bias. Rob Bell, who he's gone off the reservation, but his first book, Velvet Elvis, he talked about truth is truth, and you should embrace truth wherever you find it. And so many times we look at something, and even though it's true, we can't see through our own bias. We can't imagine that somebody that is in a stereotypical camp that we don't agree with could possibly say or do anything good.
Yeah. It's just pride.
Yeah, and it's our own jacked up sense of spirituality. And so Jesus, I think that's what he's doing to the disciples there. He draws them in. I've only come for the lost sheep of Israel. He calls her a common house pet. And then because of her persistence, he's like, boom, I commend you. You have great faith. The centurion, back earlier in Matthew, who's a Gentile, you have great faith. He says to the Pharisees, you have no faith.
Yeah, and even right before that story, he tells Peter, who was trying to walk on the boat, like, oh, you have little faith.
Right.
Yeah.
So we see the people that he commends for great faith are the least likely people. So what does that say for you and me and how we're supposed to be to the world? We're looking for people of faith outside of our own lens and our own bias.
It's probably the people who are least likely that are probably closer to what Jesus has than the people who seem obvious.
Yeah. So I guess for this week, really, the goal for all of us in the spiritual life, number one, live from Jesus. We say that all the time. In the secret place, you're allowing him to form you, reform you, but then to open your eyes spiritually, to see people in a new way, to see people outside of your own bias and stereotype.
Because it is Peter who later on in the book of Acts, I believe, says, and all who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved.
Yes.
And he sees that happen in this story when the person who's not a Jew, not an Israelite, calls Jesus, Lord, Son of David. She's calling on the name of the Lord. And it's like he's pulling on these things that he recognized that were all excerpts, and now he's connecting all the dots and realizing, oh man, this is actually for everyone. So maybe for us, as we move out throughout the week, maybe we need to ask the Spirit to help us reevaluate who we view as in and who we view as out.
Man, how difficult will that be in and of itself? Man, take out a sheet of paper and just be honest and start writing down a list of all the people that in your own mind you've judged and deemed unworthy.
Yeah.
Man,
Write a novel.
Yeah. See how far you get in that, and then just go line by line and ask God to forgive you and to open your eyes.
Yeah.
I think it could be pretty telling for all of us because we've all got bias.
Sure.
We've all got people groups, that we're judging based on nothing more than our own misguided heart. Because Jesus, and that's not to say there aren't bad, broken people in the world. But at the end of the day, this is not about.
You're also one of them.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I'm also one of them.
Yeah,
Like,
I think I said yesterday, hey, say it out loud, you'll feel better. I'm broken.
Yes.
We're all broken. We're all in need of saving. And not just that one event where we're saved, but working out our salvation. You know, that's what Paul talks about, working out with fear and trembling, that not only are we saved, we're being saved because we're being transformed.
Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, church, hope you've enjoyed this conversation. This week, as you go forward in the secret place time with Jesus, just ask him to search your heart, investigate what's in there, and ask him, maybe Greg, your idea about getting a list and just writing it out. I know I'm not a big journaler. I know journaling is something you really love. Yeah. But maybe pull out a journal and start writing names of people that you have, counted out, or people that you've judged, or people that you have a hard time forgiving, and ask God to expand your boundaries. And we'll be back next week with another conversation.
Yeah. Hey, please watch next week. Don't give up on us.
No, usually the 4th episode's the best one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Always.
Yeah.
Always.
We'll say the same thing about the 5th episode next week. So, yeah.
See
you
y'all
later.